Hello everyone, welcome to Sleep Space. Tonight we'll talk about a fascinating and mind-expanding topic. Do other versions of you exist right now? We're diving into the deep end of physics, metaphysics, and consciousness. From quantum mechanics to the multiverse, from cosmic speculation to the very nature of who you are. Before we begin, I'd love to know, where are you listening from and what time is it for you? Whether it's the middle of the night or the early morning, settle in, get comfortable. Let's explore the science and mystery of parallel universes and the branching nature of reality. Let's begin with a thought experiment. Imagine you're standing at a crossroads in your life. You can go left or right. You make a choice, you go left. But what if, in some other universe, another version of you went right? Not metaphorically, literally. Another you walking down a different path, living out the consequences of that alternate decision. This isn't just science fiction. The idea that the universe splits whenever a quantum decision is made, that reality branches into countless variations, is rooted in a very real, very serious scientific theory called the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. To understand this, we need to first step into the realm of the very small, the world of quantum physics. Down here, the rules that govern atoms and particles don't behave like the solid, predictable world we live in. Instead, particles exist in what's called a superposition, a state where they can be in multiple positions or even multiple states at once. Take the famous double slit experiment. Fire a single electron at a barrier with two slits, and it doesn't go through just one. It behaves as if it goes through both slits simultaneously, creating an interference pattern on the screen behind it. That's because until it's observed, the electron exists in all possible states. It's both here and there, in all paths, all at once. But here's the twist. When we observe it, it seems to choose a position. The wave function collapses. The particle decides where to be. This collapse has baffled physicists for decades. What causes it? Is it the act of observation, the presence of a conscious observer, or is there something deeper going on? In the 1950s, physicist Hugh Everett III proposed a radical answer. What if the wave function never collapses at all? What if every possibility actually happens, just in different branches of the universe? This is the foundation of the many worlds interpretation. In this view, when you make a decision, say to have coffee instead of tea, the universe doesn't collapse into one reality. It splits. In one universe, you chose coffee. In another, you chose tea. Both versions of you continue on, unaware of each other, but equally real. It sounds bizarre, but from a mathematical perspective, it solves many of the paradoxes in quantum physics. The equations don't need a mysterious collapse. They simply evolve in all directions, all at once. This brings us to the central question. If the universe splits with every quantum event, how many versions of you are there? And are they all out there existing right now? The answer is staggering. If quantum events are constantly creating branching realities, there could be an infinite number of versions of you, making different choices, living different lives, with some so close to your own timeline that they're nearly identical, and others that are unimaginably strange. Now, you might wonder, if these other versions of you exist, why can't we see them? Why don't we feel them? Why does life feel so solid and singular? To answer that, we need to talk about decoherence. Quantum systems are delicate. The moment they interact with the environment, with air molecules, light, or anything else, they lose their quantum behavior. They decohere, collapsing into a single classical outcome from our perspective. This makes the different branches of the universe inaccessible to each other. They're not destroyed, they're just no longer able to interfere. Think of it like this. Imagine multiple radio stations broadcasting at once, but you only have a radio that can tune into one frequency at a time. The others are still out there, but you can't hear them. The many worlds are like that. They're running parallel, but they can't interact, at least not with the tools we currently have. But how do we know this isn't just a fanciful interpretation? Well, here's the thing. We don't. The many worlds interpretation is just that, an interpretation. It makes the same predictions as standard quantum mechanics, but offers a different explanation for what's going on behind the scenes. It's elegant, consistent, and perhaps unsettling, because it suggests that reality is far stranger than we can easily comprehend. But let's step beyond quantum physics for a moment. The idea of parallel universes isn't confined to quantum mechanics. In cosmology, the study of the universe at the larger scales, there are other reasons to suspect that multiple versions of reality might exist. Consider the inflationary model of the Big Bang. According to this theory, the early universe expanded at an exponential rate. In some versions of this theory, different regions of spacetime may stop inflating at different times, creating bubble universes, isolated pockets of reality, each with its own physical laws. This is called the multiverse, a vast, perhaps infinite collection of universes, each existing in its own bubble of space-time. Some may have different particles, different dimensions, or different laws of gravity. And some may be nearly identical to ours, with Earth, humanity, and even you, but with small differences that ripple through history in fascinating ways. In this version of the multiverse, it's not quantum decisions that create parallel realities, but cosmic expansion itself. Still, the end result is the same. Countless versions of you scattered across an unfathomable reality. Then there's string theory, another contender for a theory of everything. String theory suggests that the fundamental particles of the universe are not points, but tiny vibrating strings. The vibrations determine the properties of particles, like mass, charge, and spin. But for string theory to work, it requires extra dimensions, not just the 3 of space and 1 of time, but as many as 10 or 11. These extra dimensions could be curled up in ways we can't perceive, or extended in other universes altogether. Within string theory, there are many possible configurations, what's called the string landscape. Each configuration could correspond to a different universe with different physical constants. In other words, yet another mechanism for parallel realities. So whether we look at the very small through quantum physics or the very large through cosmology and string theory, the idea of multiple versions of you isn't just fantasy. It's a serious, if unproven, possibility. Of course, this raises deep philosophical questions. If there are infinite versions of you, each making different decisions, who are you? Are you the sum of your choices? Are all versions equally real? Or is there something uniquely you about the consciousness experiencing this specific path through the branches? Some thinkers propose that consciousness is what rides the wave of decisions, that we are like passengers on a train, unaware of the infinite other trains departing at the same moment. Others suggest that consciousness might itself be quantum, able to exist in superposition, split across many worlds, or perhaps even capable of entanglement beyond our understanding. These are not settled questions, but they invite us to think of identity not as a fixed thing, but as a process, a flow. a thread through an infinite tapestry of realities. It's also worth noting that these ideas are not just academic. They're becoming part of our culture, from science fiction movies to books, podcasts, and late-night conversations. The multiverse has become a modern myth, not because it's false, but because it speaks to something deep within us. The yearning to understand our place in the cosmos. The sense that there might be more, not just out there in space, but in the very nature of existence itself. So as you lie back and let these ideas settle into your mind, consider the possibility that your life is just one thread in a vast, infinite tapestry. That every decision, every moment, is a branching point. That somewhere, right now, another version of you is making a different choice and living a different life. Not in your imagination, not as a metaphor, but as a real, physical counterpart, separated by quantum boundaries, unreachable but no less real. And as you drift into thought or into sleep, you might ask, what would those other lives be like? What would you be like? If you had said yes instead of no, turned left instead of right, spoken the truth instead of holding back. And perhaps the most humbling question of all, if every possibility exists, what does that mean for free will? Are we choosing or simply experiencing the unfolding of all possibilities? We'll explore that next. To examine the question of free will in a multiverse framework, we have to step carefully between philosophy, physics, and neuroscience. It's a question that's haunted thinkers for centuries. Are our choices genuinely free, or are they determined by prior conditions? If the many worlds theory is true, and every possible choice branches into a separate reality, does that mean we are free to choose? Or are we merely conscious passengers on one trajectory among an infinite spread of outcomes? Start with this. In quantum mechanics, many events are probabilistic rather than deterministic. That is, given a set of circumstances, we can't predict with certainty what will happen next. We can only calculate probabilities. When applied to human decisions, which are ultimately governed by the behavior of particles and neurons, it could be argued that indeterminacy is built into the system. But the many worlds view removes the randomness. In this model, nothing truly random happens. Every outcome does occur. It just does so in its own separate branch. In one, you pick the red shirt. In another, the blue. There is no uncertainty, only a multiplicity of certainties. So where does your experience fit in? From your perspective, you still feel like you made a choice. The decision felt real, deliberate. That sensation, the subjective feeling of agency, doesn't disappear in the many worlds framework. You still experience one outcome and not the others. You still live your version of reality. So free will might not vanish, it might just be reframed. Some philosophers describe this as perspectival freedom. From a bird's eye view, everything that can happen does happen. But from the ground, you're only ever aware of your own path. Your story unfolds as a continuous thread, with each choice shaping your narrative, even if all narratives exist in parallel. But this brings us to an even deeper question. What is the self in this context? In everyday life, we think of ourselves as singular, a body, a brain, a set of memories and thoughts. But if countless versions of you exist simultaneously, all branching from different quantum events, is there a single core you? Or are you more like a cloud of possibilities, a spectrum of selves? One way to think about this is identity as a pattern. Your brain is made up of roughly 86 billion neurons, all firing in complex configurations. Your personality, memories, thoughts and preferences are patterns of activity within this system. In each universe, the pattern is slightly different, sometimes barely different, a skipped breakfast, a delayed train, other times vastly different, a different career, a different country, a different self. So if your identity is a pattern, then each version of you is an expression of that pattern in a different context. You are not a singular entity, but a set of evolving configurations, each shaped by branching realities. And yet, there's something undeniably personal about your experience. The continuity of memory and self-awareness creates a strong illusion of unity. It feels like we are the same person from moment to moment, despite the constant change. That sensation is what anchors us, even in a reality where infinite versions exist. But let's take a step back from the metaphysical and return to the physical. You might be wondering, has anyone actually seen evidence of these parallel universes? The short answer is no, at least not directly. These worlds are, by their nature, non-interacting. Once decoherence occurs, the branches of reality become effectively isolated. But scientists are exploring whether traces of interference might remain, especially in highly controlled quantum systems. There's ongoing research into quantum computing, for instance. Some theorists suggest that the computational power of quantum systems may arise from interference between different branches. If true, this might be an indirect hint that the many worlds are real, that parallel computations are occurring across versions of reality and briefly interacting. Still, it's a controversial area. Others argue that the math doesn't require alternate realities, only that quantum systems behave as if multiple possibilities exist simultaneously. Whether those possibilities are real or simply convenient tools for calculation remains an open debate. What makes the many worlds interpretation so compelling, though, is its elegance. It doesn't introduce any new forces or mechanisms. It doesn't need a mysterious collapse. It simply says, let the math describe reality. If the wave function contains all possible outcomes, then all those outcomes exist, not as probabilities, but as actualities. And that leads us to a fascinating concept: quantum immortality. This is a thought experiment, not something proven or testable, but still deeply thought-provoking. Imagine a scenario where your survival depends on a quantum event, say the decay of a particle. In some universes, the particle decays and you die. In others, it doesn't, and you live. From your perspective, the one that continues to experience consciousness, you always find yourself in the universe where you survive. In other words, your experience never includes your own death. You always wake up in the universe where you made it. This has led some to speculate that, from the inside, consciousness might be immortal, not in a mystical sense, but as a byproduct of infinite branching. You always end up in the timelines where you're still alive. Again, this is speculative, but it highlights how the many worlds interpretation changes not just our physics, but our sense of mortality, identity, and meaning. And it also raises ethical questions. If every possible decision is played out somewhere, does that diminish the importance of our actions? If every version of you exists, the kind, the cruel, the brave, the fearful, does personal responsibility still matter? The answer lies in perspective. You don't experience all versions. You experience one. That means your actions in this universe still shape the life you live. The existence of other paths doesn't erase the value of this one. It enhances it. You get to choose what kind of person you become in this specific thread of reality. It's also worth noting that some versions of you might not even be recognizable as you. Over time, small differences can compound. A single missed opportunity, a different teacher in school, a friendship that never formed. These can spiral into drastically different lives. This is known as the butterfly effect, where tiny changes can have large consequences. It reminds us that the multiverse isn't just a collection of identical clones. It's a vast landscape of diversity, shaped by an infinite variety of events and choices. And here's something truly humbling. Somewhere, there's a version of you who made every possible choice you've ever considered. A version who followed their dream, a version who didn't, a version who left, a version who stayed. They all exist, and yet they are all you. So what does this mean for how we live? It might encourage us to be more mindful, to take ownership of our choices, to realize that while every possibility may exist somewhere, only one path is ours to walk. That path is shaped, step by step, by our decisions. And within that, there is a kind of freedom, not to escape the multiverse, but to inhabit our own branch with clarity and intention. There's also a comfort in knowing that every unlived life, every regret, every what if, isn't lost. It exists in some form, somewhere. That doesn't mean we can access it, but it means we are part of something much larger than ourselves. A web of realities so vast, so intricate, that it defies comprehension. It reframes the human experience. We are not isolated beings on a single track. We are expressions of possibility, dancing through an ever-branching cosmos. And in that dance, we find not just mystery, but meaning. Because even if other versions of you exist, only you get to tell this story. Your story. To go even deeper into the structure of this idea, we need to understand what is meant by space-time in a multiverse context. In our everyday lives, we see space and time as a fixed backdrop, the stage upon which events unfold, but in modern physics, especially in general relativity and quantum field theory, space and time are dynamic. They stretch, bend, ripple, and, according to some models, split. Every time a branching event happens in the quantum field, it doesn't just create a new set of particle positions, it creates an entirely new configuration of the entire universe, a new trajectory through space-time. This means that parallel versions of you don't just occupy different outcomes in the same world, they occupy completely different universes with their own consistent realities. The sheer scale of this branching is mind-bending. Imagine that even at this very second, trillions of atoms in your body, electrons, protons, quarks, are undergoing quantum events. In the many worlds framework, every one of these events spawns a new branch. That means you're not just splitting once in a while at major life choices. You're splitting constantly in microscopic, unnoticeable ways. Your heart beats slightly earlier or later, a single neuron fires or doesn't, your eye twitches or stays still. Each branch is a coherent universe, unfolding independently. You may never be aware of these tiny differences, but they matter. Over time, the accumulation of minuscule changes can lead to entirely divergent outcomes. Different health paths, relationships, careers, even thoughts and memories. Now consider what this means for memory. Memory is one of the most essential elements of identity. It's how we track who we are and what we've been through. But memory itself is not a perfect recording device. It's a reconstruction, influenced by perception, emotion, and time. In the multiverse, even your memories could begin to diverge across branches. not because the past changed, but because the configuration of your brain's quantum state changed. There could be versions of you who remember events differently, not out of confusion, but because their internal neurological paths played out in alternate ways. In some realities, perhaps your earliest childhood memory is vivid and sharp. In others, it may never have formed at all. These divergences could lead to slightly different emotional landscapes, shaping the tone of your inner world in subtle or significant ways. This idea intersects with another mysterious and increasingly studied topic: consciousness itself. Science has made huge progress in understanding the brain, but consciousness, the subjective experience of being, remains a puzzle. Some theories propose that consciousness arises purely from classical computations in the brain. Others suggest quantum processes may play a role. One particularly provocative theory is OR, orchestrated objective reduction, proposed by physicist Roger Penrose and anesthesiologist Stuart Hameroff. It suggests that quantum activity within microtubules, structures inside neurons, might be the source of consciousness. If this is true, then consciousness might be inherently quantum and therefore subject to superposition and branching. In such a framework, your consciousness would not only split when decisions are made, but would continue to exist across branches in a state of distributed awareness. You would be a cloud of conscious threads, each unfolding into its own path, each one unaware of the others. It's worth noting that OR is highly controversial. Many neuroscientists and physicists remain skeptical of quantum explanations for consciousness, citing thermal decoherence and the complexity of isolating quantum states in a warm, wet brain. But the mere possibility points to how entwined our understanding of mind and physics might be. Now, let's reframe this with a more grounded analogy. Imagine the multiverse as a vast tree, each branch representing a different universe. As time moves forward, new twigs form constantly. The trunk is the shared past, the moment before branching. As you move along your branch, you grow further from the other twigs. Close branches might be similar, a version of you who made a different lunch today. Distant branches are radically different, a version of you who never learned your native language or who wasn't born at all. You exist on one twig, but the tree as a whole is you, or rather, a grand network of selves, all part of a larger structure. It's natural to ask, if all these branches are real, what happens to the self when they diverge significantly? Are these still you, or do they become someone else? This brings us into the realm of continuity. In philosophy, personal identity over time is often measured by continuity of memory, personality, and structure. But in the multiverse, continuity becomes fuzzy. At what point does a branching self stop being you and become a different person entirely? If a version of you makes a series of radically different choices, joins the military, moves to a different continent, experiences trauma or transformation, are they still the same you, or merely a sibling self, sharing some of your DNA and history, but with an entirely different trajectory? There is no clear line. The boundaries of identity are not fixed. They shift with experience and perspective. In the multiverse, identity is not a point, but a region, a fluid, evolving pattern stretched across many possible selves. But there's another dimension to all this: time itself. In our everyday experience, time flows in one direction. The past is fixed, the future is open. But in quantum mechanics, the laws are time symmetric. This means that mathematically speaking, the equations don't care whether time is moving forward or backward. Some physicists have explored models where future events could influence the past, or where the entire structure of reality is a four-dimensional block, with time as just another dimension like space. In this view, all events, past, present, future, coexist. The multiverse doesn't evolve, it is. This is sometimes called the block universe, or eternalism. In this model, your many selves don't just exist across branching realities, they exist across all of time. Every moment of your life, past and future, is already part of a vast, unchanging structure. This challenges our most basic intuitions. We think of the future as unwritten, our choices as open. But in a block universe, all choices have already been made. Free will becomes a perspective, not a power to shape the future, but an experience of moving through a structure that already contains all possibilities. So how do these theories reconcile? How can time be both branching and fixed? Some interpretations suggest that branching occurs within the block universe, that it is a four-dimensional branching structure, with each moment being a node in a vast temporal network. Others argue that the multiverse is a kind of meta-structure beyond our space and time, where different universes with different timelines coexist in a higher dimensional space. Either way, the implications are staggering. You are not a point traveling through time. You are a thread in a vast web of possibility, embedded in a structure that defies ordinary perception. This brings us to a final idea for this section, the measure problem. In a multiverse with infinite branches, not all versions of you are equally likely. Some branches may be far more common than others. In fact, some versions of you might be astronomically rare, requiring extremely improbable quantum events to occur. This raises the question, what determines the weight or measure of a universe? In quantum mechanics, this is represented by the amplitude squared of a branch's wave function. Higher amplitude means higher probability, so even though all branches are real, some are more likely than others, and you're more likely to find yourself in one of them. This leads to some philosophical consequences. If you are more likely to be in a high measure branch, should you act as if those branches matter more? Or do rare branches still have equal subjective significance? And how do we understand meaning in a reality where every possible story is true somewhere? This is where science meets the limits of language. Our minds evolved to survive in a narrow band of experience, to chase food, seek shelter, find companionship. They were not built to comprehend infinity, or to grasp the fabric of quantum fields and manifold universes. But here we are, reaching beyond those limits, trying to make sense of a cosmos that continually exceeds our imagination. So let's return for a moment to the personal. Right now, in this moment, you are experiencing a unique point on a unique path. It may be one of infinite possible versions, but it's yours, and that makes it deeply meaningful. Even in a multiverse, this moment is unrepeatable. Even if countless versions of it exist, this one is yours alone to live. And maybe that's the most beautiful paradox of all. You are one among infinite selves. And yet, this experience, right now, is completely and exclusively yours. To further unravel this question of parallel selves, we must look at the mathematical structures that underlie the universe. Many physicists argue that reality itself is not made of particles or waves, but of information. According to this view, the universe is a kind of quantum computation, a vast, evolving system governed by algorithms, symmetries, and logical constraints. This leads us into the realm of mathematical realism. The idea that mathematics doesn't just describe the universe, it is the universe. If every consistent mathematical structure corresponds to a real physical world, then the number of potential universes isn't just vast, it's literally infinite. This includes all logically consistent realities, even ones with different physical laws. This is Max Tegmark's mathematical universe hypothesis, a bold proposal that takes the multiverse to its logical extreme. In this model, every consistent mathematical structure exists as a physical universe. And if consciousness can arise in that structure, then some version of you may arise there too. These versions wouldn't just be you with different life choices. They might be built from entirely different particles. They might exist in different dimensions. They might perceive time or space in completely alien ways. But as long as the structure permits conscious experience, someone or something would be there to perceive it. This is a radical expansion of the multiverse idea, not just branching timelines, not just bubble universes from inflation, but all possible realities existing timelessly in the abstract realm of mathematics. The implications are difficult to grasp. It means that any self-consistent reality you can imagine, and even those you can't, already exists somewhere in the vast Platonic library of possible worlds. Every fictional story, every dream, every mythological landscape may correspond to a real structure in some domain of this meta-reality. And if these universes exist, are they in any way connected? This brings us to a deeply speculative idea: quantum entanglement across universes. In standard quantum mechanics, particles can become entangled, meaning their states are correlated even when separated by vast distances. Measuring one instantly determines the state of the other. This effect has been verified experimentally and violates classical intuition. But what if entanglement isn't limited to our own universe? What if entangled states span across branches of the multiverse? Could there be subtle correlations between you and your other selves? Could decisions or experiences in one branch subtly echo through to another? So far, there's no evidence for this. Most physicists would argue that once decoherence occurs, branches become non-communicating. But in the quantum realm, nothing is truly ruled out unless it's forbidden by the math. There may be forms of entanglement or connection we simply haven't discovered yet, phenomena that link timelines in strange, delicate ways. This idea appears often in fiction, the notion of déjà vu, or sensing an alternate life path, or feeling like you've lived a moment before. While science hasn't validated such experiences as multiversal signals, they do reflect a deep cultural intuition that our lives are not strictly isolated, that somewhere, somehow, the paths not taken still resonate. Now, let's turn to the concept of simulation, another modern idea that overlaps with the multiverse. Suppose that advanced civilizations, perhaps future versions of ourselves, gain the ability to simulate conscious beings inside powerful computers. These simulations could be rich and detailed, indistinguishable from real life. If that happens, and if simulated minds are conscious, then the number of simulated realities could vastly outnumber biological ones. This leads to the simulation argument, famously proposed by philosopher Nick Bostrom. The core idea is simple. If simulations are possible, and they are common, then statistically it is more likely that we are living in a simulated universe than the original base universe. But here's the twist. If simulated universes exist, they too could be subject to quantum branching. That means even simulated realities could contain their own multiverses. Each time a simulated mind makes a decision, the underlying quantum processes could still split into alternate timelines, even inside the simulation. This becomes recursive, simulated multiverses inside simulated multiverses, layers upon layers of branching. The structure becomes fractal, endlessly nesting, like mirrors reflecting mirrors into infinity. Whether we live in a simulation or not, the possibility reinforces the idea that reality is not what it seems. Our experience of the world, solid, continuous, linear, may be a perceptual artifact, a simplification of something vastly more complex. So what anchors us in the face of such complexity? One answer is consciousness itself. Despite all the speculation about universes and branches, the only thing any of us can truly be certain of is our own conscious experience, the moment-to-moment awareness of being. This is the one thing you cannot doubt. You might question your memories, your beliefs, even your senses, but the fact that you're experiencing something is undeniable. This leads to the idea of the observer, a central concept in quantum mechanics. Observation is what collapses the wave function, what selects one branch of reality over another. But what is an observer? Is it a human, a mind, a conscious agent? Or can any interaction, even by inanimate matter, count as an observation? These questions are still debated, but they point to a mysterious link between consciousness and physical reality. Some theories suggest that the observer plays a special role, that the universe becomes real only when observed. Others argue that the observer is just another part of the quantum system, no more special than a rock or a thermometer. Still, from your own point of view, you are the center of your universe. That's not arrogance, it's just physics. Every observation happens from a point of view, and that point of view is yours. You are not outside the universe looking in. You are inside, looking out. Your perception creates a local branch of reality, a bubble of meaning and experience that no one else shares in exactly the same way. This brings us to the poetic truth of the multiverse, that even if all possible versions of you exist, none of them replace you. None of them cancel your story, your thoughts, your feelings. Each version is a distinct expression, like a different musical phrase played on the same instrument. And because each version is separate, there's something precious about your specific path. Your joys, your sorrows, your choices, even if echoed elsewhere, still matter here, in this branch, in this life. In fact, the vastness of the multiverse can make your particular experience feel more alive, not less. You are not trapped by what might have been. You are free to live fully into what is, knowing that all possibilities are part of the grand design. And you might even take comfort in the unknown. If somewhere, in another universe, a version of you found peace, or love, or healing, maybe that version radiates something through the whole structure. Maybe every victory of the self, in any branch, adds something to the total harmony of being. These are not scientific claims, but reflections, ways to live within a framework that stretches human understanding. Science gives us the tools, but meaning is something we create. And so, as we walk through this world, seemingly alone, yet part of something unimaginably vast, we can choose how to respond. With wonder, with responsibility, with curiosity, with grace. Because even if other versions of you are out there, only one is experiencing this exact moment, and that moment is yours. To understand the full impact of this idea, we have to ask a difficult but important question. What does it feel like to live in a multiverse? So far, we've explored the science, the models, the thought experiments. But beyond the theory is the experience of being human in a reality that might not be singular. Most people live their entire lives with the assumption that reality is linear, choices are final, and the past is fixed. But if every choice branches off a new world, then you are constantly surrounded by invisible alternatives. Lives you could be living, selves you could be becoming. This introduces a new form of existential awareness, a sense of multi-dimensional responsibility. Because in a multiverse, everything you might do is happening somewhere, but only one path is yours to walk. The presence of infinite alternatives doesn't make your choices meaningless. It makes them deeply personal. You're selecting a direction through a forest of possibilities, and each step locks in a new landscape. This means regret, too, takes on new weight. In a traditional view of life, regret is simply a missed opportunity, a moment lost. But in a multiverse framework, regret becomes a recognition that another version of you didn't miss it. They said the thing you didn't say. They took the leap you were afraid to take. They let go when you held on, or held on when you walked away. They exist, as real as you, but you can't meet them. You can only imagine them and learn from the fact that those choices were possible. The multiverse, in this way, is both a mirror and a teacher. But it's not just about the past. The future, too, opens up in radical ways. In a branching universe, there isn't a single future waiting ahead of you. There are countless ones. Futures where things go wrong, and futures where they go right. Futures where you grow, heal, expand, and become more than you thought possible. You don't need to believe in fate or manifestation to see this. It's built into the structure of branching paths. What changes your trajectory is your decisions. Each one a fork in the road. So if you want to meet a better version of yourself, you don't need to look for them in another universe. You just need to become them in this one. But here's something more subtle and strange. The very act of imagining other versions of yourself might already be a kind of connection. When you visualize a better path, a more courageous version, a wiser one, a kinder one, you're not just dreaming. You're modeling a real configuration that could exist in some nearby branch. Your brain, through thought, is exploring that region of possibility space. This is similar to how physicists model physical systems, not by seeing them directly, but by mapping the space of all configurations and tracking the evolution of that space. Your mind, in moments of reflection, might be doing the same, and this brings us to possibility space, a concept used in both physics and philosophy to describe the total set of all potential configurations of a system. For a person, possibility space is made of decisions, reactions, thoughts, and relationships. Every time you consider a new idea or shift your behavior, you're not just changing, you're moving through possibility space. In a multiverse, you are not a single point, but a trajectory through this space. A line carved by decisions, shaped by attention and intention. And every nearby path is accessible, but only if you change direction. This gives us a surprisingly grounded view of change. It's not magic, it's movement, through the space of alternatives guided by action. And while you can't leap instantly to a far-off version of yourself, you can step in that direction, moment by moment, branch by branch. But there's another layer of this idea, one that links deeply to empathy and ethics. If every possible version of you exists, then the same is true for everyone else. Every person you've ever met or will meet also exists in countless forms. Kind versions, cruel ones. Confused, brilliant, broken, joyful. all expressions of possibility. This doesn't mean we excuse harmful behavior, but it does offer a new way to understand people, not as fixed identities, but as probability clouds. You're not dealing with one type of person, but with a trajectory through possibility space. And like you, they could shift, they could grow, collapse, or expand into something entirely new. This creates space for compassion, because when you realize that the version of someone you're dealing with is just one of many, it becomes easier to forgive, to hope, or to let go. The multiverse reminds us that no one is ever fully defined by their worst moment or their best. We are all unfinished, in motion, and surrounded by alternate versions of ourselves we can't even imagine. But let's take a different angle now. What does all of this mean scientifically for the idea of a self? We've already explored the notion that identity is a pattern, a dynamic process in the brain. But identity is also partly narrative. It's the story you tell yourself about who you are. In the multiverse, there are countless stories, some coherent, some fragmented, some still being written. So the question becomes, which story do you choose to believe? This is where physics meets psychology. Because while all paths may exist, the one you inhabit is determined, in part, by which internal story you reinforce. The decisions you make, the way you interpret events, the way you talk to yourself when no one else is listening. Over time, this inner dialogue becomes the guide through the branching structure. It's your compass, not just for navigating the world, but for navigating your own evolution. And when we look at the universe at large, beyond even quantum theory, we find something even more humbling. There are serious theories in physics, like the holographic principle, suggesting that the entire universe is a projection of information from a lower dimensional surface. In this view, space, time, and even material substance may be emergent phenomena, illusions generated by a more fundamental informational layer. If that's true, then identity too may be an emergent illusion. A useful one, but a local phenomenon, like a whirlpool in a stream. A temporary pattern that feels solid, but is always in motion. You are not separate from the universe, you are of it. Not a thing in space, but a process unfolding within it. So what do you do with that knowledge? One answer is to live more lightly, to hold your story with openness, to realize that you're not locked into a single version of yourself, nor of reality. You can shift, evolve, let go. You are part of a much larger flow, a dance of probabilities and choices that stretches beyond comprehension. That can feel overwhelming, but also liberating, because it means you're never stuck. There is always another step, another path, another version of you waiting to emerge, and it doesn't take a cosmic event to change course. Sometimes all it takes is a pause, a breath, a different thought in a moment of stress, a choice to speak instead of stay silent, or to listen instead of react. These small pivots shape the branch you walk, and through accumulation, they change everything. Because change isn't one massive shift, it's the echo of a million tiny decisions, compounding in ways you can't always predict. And through those decisions, you become not just someone new, but someone truer, someone more aligned with the version of yourself you can sense, but not yet see. Let's now zoom out, far beyond individual consciousness, to consider the multiverse not just as a collection of possibilities, but as a kind of cosmic organism. A structure so vast and intricate that it might possess properties we're only just beginning to understand. First, we must confront the concept of cosmic inflation again. because it provides perhaps the most accepted scientific foundation for the existence of multiple universes. After the Big Bang, the universe is thought to have undergone a period of rapid expansion. This inflation didn't stop everywhere at once. In many models, inflation continues in some regions of space eternally, spawning new universes as bubbles within a larger, inflating spacetime. Each of these bubble universes could have different initial conditions, different constants of nature, different dimensional structures, even different laws of physics. Some of them might never support life. Others might contain civilizations far more advanced than ours. And some could contain copies of Earth, not through branching timelines, but through sheer statistical inevitability. This is known as the concept of cosmic doppelgangers. Imagine space as infinite. In such a space, every possible arrangement of matter must eventually repeat. Just as there are only so many ways to shuffle a deck of cards before repetitions occur, there are only so many ways to arrange particles in a finite region like your body, your house, or even your entire planet. Eventually, given enough space, the same arrangement, down to the last atom, will reoccur. Somewhere out there, unimaginably far away, there could be another Earth, another solar system, another you, living a life that's almost identical, but with tiny differences. Perhaps their version of this conversation has one sentence phrased differently, or maybe you're the one who's slightly off from their original. It's not a science fiction trope, it's a direct consequence of mathematics in an infinite system with limited possible configurations. Now here's the strange part. You will never be able to reach or communicate with this other you. The distance between such doppelgangers is so enormous that light from one couldn't reach the other in the lifetime of the universe. These versions are effectively sealed off from one another forever, but they exist nonetheless as silent echoes in the structure of space. This idea challenges our sense of uniqueness. If there are endless copies of us, does that make our lives less special? Or could it be the opposite? Could it show us how rare and beautiful it is to experience this version here and now? The philosopher David Lewis took this further with modal realism, the idea that all possible worlds are just as real as this one, not hypothetical, not imaginary, but fully, independently real. Every way a world could be, it is, somewhere. Every alternate history, every branch, every dream or nightmare, all coexisting outside of time. If this is true, then you are not a single self with one life. You are a family of selves scattered across infinite landscapes, each living out a different narrative arc, each one anchored in its own laws of cause and effect, each one asking at some point the same question you are now. Is this the only me? And yet, no matter how many yous exist, you are the only one experiencing this path. That gives your experience something irreplaceable, because it is filtered through your specific memories, emotions, context, and attention. It is happening now, for you, alone. Let's turn briefly to something very practical, the psychology of choice in a multiverse. When people face big decisions, they often feel overwhelmed, as if the weight of their future rests entirely on this moment. But in the multiverse, every choice creates a version of reality in which the other path was taken. The pressure shifts. You don't have to worry about what might have been, because somewhere it is being, just not by you. This doesn't mean you should be careless. Quite the opposite. It means that the version you live with, the one that shapes your memories and relationships, still matters enormously. It's not about what other yous are doing, it's about what you're doing right now. The realization that all options happen doesn't erase the consequences of choice. It simply reframes them. In the multiverse, the act of choosing isn't about selecting one outcome and discarding others. It's about selecting the version of yourself you want to embody and letting go of the versions you won't be. There's a quiet kind of empowerment in that, because in this vast sea of alternatives, you are the author of your story. Not the only author, but the one holding the pen, in this version, on this page. And while we've mostly focused on science and theory, it's worth noting that this idea of multiple selves, of infinite lives, has ancient roots. Many spiritual and mystical traditions speak of parallel realms, alternate incarnations, and layered realities. From the Hindu concept of simultaneous reincarnation to Tibetan dream yoga and indigenous stories of mirrored worlds, the idea of a many-layered self has long been part of the human imagination. These stories are not scientific evidence, but they do suggest something important: that the human mind has always intuited that reality is more complex than it appears, that time, identity, and causality are not linear, that what we see is only one thread in a much larger weave. It's also worth pausing here to explore a different kind of you, the collective you. What if other versions of you are not just individuals with slightly different lives, but parts of a greater whole? What if you are not isolated, but connected, like neurons in a brain or branches on a tree? What if consciousness itself is non-local, and the you that exists in this universe is simply a node in a wider field? There are theories in physics and metaphysics that support this idea. One is the concept of quantum holism, the notion that systems are fundamentally inseparable, that what appears to be separate parts are in fact expressions of a larger, indivisible structure. In this view, you are not one of many yous, you are all of them, but experiencing one at a time. Your individuality is like a window. It lets you look out at the world from one angle. But the structure behind that window, the consciousness, the awareness, might be shared. This isn't provable, but it does shift the question from which version of me is real to what is the thing that connects all versions? Is there a central observer watching all branches, or are each of you fully independent with no higher link? These are unanswerable questions, at least for now. But the fact that we can ask them at all suggests we are brushing up against the edge of what it means to exist. We are no longer talking just about physics or identity or time. We are talking about being. And this brings us to a final thought for this part of our journey. In all the complexity of the multiverse, the infinite branches, the cosmic doubles, the mathematical spaces and eternal timelines, there remains one constant: presence. Your awareness, your capacity to pause, to feel, to reflect. That's the only thing that doesn't change, even across theory. Whether the universe is singular or infinite, simulated or emergent, your awareness of this moment is the anchor. You may not control the structure of the cosmos, but you control your attention, and through it, your experience. And maybe, just maybe, that's the closest thing we have to truth in a multiverse. Now we arrive at one of the most fascinating and uncomfortable implications of a branching reality. What happens to the versions of you that make the wrong decisions? In a multiverse where every possible outcome is realized, every victory is mirrored by a failure, every act of kindness by its absence, every success by a loss. Somewhere, a version of you didn't say the right thing, didn't take the leap, or maybe chose something harmful. And yet that version exists, just as real, just as alive. just as conscious. This isn't meant to provoke guilt or fear. Rather, it asks us to expand the circle of our compassion, not just to others, but to ourselves. We often judge ourselves for our past choices, but if those choices played out differently in other branches, then it's not about right or wrong. It's about what you do with the path you're on now. All of this leads us to one of the deepest philosophical tensions, the paradox of determinism and freedom in a multiverse. In one sense, if every path is followed, then perhaps no path is truly chosen. Everything that can happen does happen, but you, here, only experience one. That experience feels like choice. You feel yourself selecting among options, rejecting one future in favor of another. That's the essence of free will. But the many worlds interpretation complicates this. From a larger perspective, all outcomes are equally real. But from your local point of view, that freedom still matters. The brain doesn't operate on cosmic absolutes. It operates on perception, experience, memory, and feedback. The you who is listening to this now lives at the intersection of your biology and your narrative, shaped by the past, but never fully bound to it. The self is both determined and free. It's shaped by forces beyond its control, yet it participates in shaping its path. And here we come to a quiet truth hiding beneath the science. The self is not an object, it is a process, a river, not a rock, a flame, not a statue. You are always becoming, always adapting, always living in the space between what has been and what might be. Now think about the concept of time again, but not linear time. Subjective time. In psychological terms, your experience of time is elastic. It stretches during moments of fear or awe. It condenses when you're lost in routine. Your memories are not stored in neat, ordered files, but in clusters shaped by emotion, repetition, and meaning. Some moments feel like they happened yesterday, even if decades have passed. Others vanish completely, though they happened just last week. This temporal subjectivity suggests something remarkable. You don't just live in chronological time, you live in narrative time, and that narrative is partly under your influence. You can reframe it, rethink it, rebuild it. Even if the events themselves are fixed, the meaning you assign to them is not. And that brings us to a topic often left out of scientific discussions: healing. In a multiverse, healing takes on a strange but beautiful form. Somewhere, there is a version of you who didn't get hurt, or who did, but found a path through it. Somewhere, there's a version of you who forgave the person you still carry in your mind. There's a version who let go, who spoke up, who made peace. These versions may be inaccessible to you physically, but they exist as reference points in possibility space. When you imagine healing, you are not fantasizing. You are aligning your awareness with nearby branches in which healing has already occurred. That act of mental alignment, that vision of a better self, can be the first step toward making it real in your own path. And the closer your actions bring you to that version, the more your trajectory begins to converge with theirs. You aren't becoming someone else. You're simply walking toward a version of yourself that already exists, in potential, in pattern, in spirit. Now, let's explore another overlooked question. How do other people appear in your multiverse? If you're branching, so are they. Every person you meet has countless versions. Some who never met you, some who met you and changed completely. Some who hurt you and some who never did. The relationships you experience are one thread among many, and they are shaped as much by your own evolution as by theirs. That means your perception of another person, who they are, what they mean to you, is partly determined by which version of you you're embodying. Change your branch and you may find yourself experiencing a different version of the same person. A version who listens better, or who pushes you further, or who no longer fits into your path at all. This idea doesn't deny the reality of relationships. It deepens them. It shows that our bonds are not fixed. They're dynamic systems, co-evolving across a landscape of possibility. And as you shift, so does your gravitational pull in the multiverse. You start to attract different kinds of people, not by magic, but by pattern recognition, behavior, resonance. This isn't just theoretical. We've all seen it. Someone changes their perspective, and suddenly their whole life shifts. They leave a toxic relationship. They find a creative spark. They begin to experience a world that seems to support them instead of fight them. It's not the world that changed, it's the version of themselves they started to embody. That's how multiverse theory becomes practical, not as a way to fantasize about alternate lives, but as a model for understanding transformation. When you act differently, speak differently, think differently, you become different. Not just metaphorically. In a branching universe, that version of you already exists, and you're catching up to them. There's also something profoundly humbling here. The more you grow, the more you realize that no single version of you is complete. You are not just the wise version, or the angry one, or the hurt one, or the curious one. You are a field of selves, constantly interacting. And when you face a difficult moment, a conflict, a decision, a wound, it can help to pause and ask, what would the version of me who's already healed do next? Not as wishful thinking, but as navigation. You're not inventing something new. You're listening to a frequency already broadcasting inside the web of who you could be. It's all there, all possible, waiting for you to choose your next note in the symphony. And this leads us gently toward the idea of convergence. While the multiverse is often described as infinite branching, some theories suggest that branches can, under certain conditions, converge. That is, different versions of you, after diverging, might find themselves in similar circumstances again, like rivers that split but rejoin downstream. This is speculative, but it offers a powerful metaphor that change is not always about abandoning the past. Sometimes it's about returning to it with new awareness. You can revisit places you thought you'd outgrown and see them with entirely different eyes. You can rebuild relationships that once felt broken. You can bring the wisdom of other branches back into this one, not by time travel, but by evolution. Because in the end, the multiverse doesn't have to mean distance or disconnection. It can mean depth. Not fragmentation, but fullness. Not escape, but embodiment. Not infinite versions, but infinite paths to presence. At this point in our journey, the question is no longer just whether other versions of you exist. The question becomes, what is the nature of awareness itself across all those versions? We often treat consciousness as a light bulb, either on or off. You're either awake and aware, or you're not. But modern science and ancient philosophy both suggest that consciousness might be more like a field, something not limited to individual brains or even specific bodies. This takes us into an area of active debate in physics and neuroscience, the idea of panpsychism. It suggests that consciousness might be a fundamental feature of reality, like mass or charge. Instead of emerging only in brains, it could exist, in varying degrees, throughout all of nature. Some physicists have taken this further and proposed that consciousness might be a kind of informational structure, an intrinsic property of complex systems that integrate information. This is called integrated information theory, or IIT. According to IIT, any system that possesses a certain level of complexity and interconnectedness generates a field of awareness. Now apply this to the multiverse. If consciousness emerges wherever the structure is right, then in every universe where a version of you has a functioning brain, a version of you is aware. But does that awareness stay separate in each branch? Or is there a deeper continuity? Is there something beneath the surface, something shared? In ancient Indian philosophy, there's a concept called Atman, the individual soul, and Brahman, the universal soul. The idea is that the self you think of as you is just a wave on a much larger ocean. You're not a fragment of consciousness, you are consciousness momentarily shaped into a form. And when that form dissolves, the awareness continues. In the context of a multiverse, this suggests that all versions of you, past, future, real, unreal, are expressions of one deeper field of being. The boundaries between them are functional but not absolute. You are many, but you are also one, not in some poetic, feel-good way, but in the sense that all branches of your identity arise from and return to the same ground of awareness. This has implications not just for philosophy, but for how we live. Because if this deeper unity is real, then how you treat yourself in one branch echoes through the entire field. Your acts of kindness, your moments of clarity, your choice to grow or forgive, they ripple outward. Even if you never meet your other selves, your resonance changes the structure. Just like tuning a string on a guitar changes the vibration of nearby strings. We don't need to fully understand this to sense its power. You've probably felt it already, that strange familiarity with someone you've never met, that moment when a dream feels like a memory, that intuition that a version of you already knows something your current self is just discovering. It's not evidence, but it is experience, and that counts for something. Let's move now to something equally expansive, the role of imagination in multiversal thinking. People often dismiss imagination as fantasy, the opposite of reason. But in truth, imagination is how we navigate possibility space. It's the tool by which we mentally simulate alternate outcomes, different selves, new paths. It's not a break from reality, it's a preview of it. Your mind is constantly running models, trying to predict what will happen, what might happen, what could happen. This ability to simulate is one of the most advanced cognitive tools we have. And in a multiverse, it becomes not just useful, but vital. Because when you imagine a new version of yourself, a life with more clarity, more strength, more joy, you're not daydreaming. You're mapping potential branches. And by holding that image with intention, you begin to shift toward it, slowly, subtly, but powerfully. Imagination is the bridge between current self and possible self. It's how we stretch our identity beyond habit, beyond fear, beyond the small narratives we inherited. And this takes us to the idea of timeline alignment. Some people describe this experience as choosing your timeline, not in a magical way, but in the sense that your consistent choices, in thought, in behavior, in emotional tone, align you with a particular version of the future. If you repeat patterns of avoidance, you find yourself on the timeline where avoidance rules. If you shift into responsibility, or curiosity, or love, you begin to inhabit a timeline where those things expand. It's not superstition, it's systems theory. Your habits shape your outcomes, and over time, those outcomes reshape your identity. But here's where it gets interesting. Sometimes the shift happens fast, like a sudden awakening, a moment where everything feels different, clearer, deeper, more you. It's as if you jumped tracks, and maybe you did. Some theorists refer to this as a quantum jump, the subjective experience of shifting into a reality that's markedly different from before, even though nothing external has changed. These moments often follow intense emotional release, profound insight, or deep surrender. Again, we can't prove any of this with current tools, but the experience is real for those who live it, and in a multiverse framework, it makes a kind of sense. If your mind and behavior suddenly align with a radically different version of you, why wouldn't your reality feel altered? This doesn't mean every problem vanishes, but it does suggest that you may be closer to major change than you think, because it's not about fixing the world, it's about changing the self that engages with it. There's a deeper freedom in that, and a deeper responsibility, because now you're not just reacting to life, you're participating in its unfolding. You're selecting, moment by moment, the version of yourself who responds. And by doing so, you shape the world they inhabit. And perhaps this is the real gift of understanding parallel selves. Not that we can access them, but that we can learn from them, sense their presence like stars beyond our vision, feel their gravity, align with their strength, and in doing so, we begin to close the gap between the infinite and the immediate. We stop chasing other lives and start living this one, fully, curiously, consciously. Because maybe, in the end, all versions of you exist not to distract you, but to reflect you, to remind you that the self is not a fixed identity, it's a symphony of potentials. And every moment is an invitation to play a different note. As we approach the edges of this vast multiversal terrain, it's time to ask one more question, one that lingers quietly beneath every scientific theory and philosophical exploration. If every possible version of you exists, why are you aware of this one? This question leads us to the heart of what consciousness really is. Not as a product of the brain alone, but as a filter, a lens, a point of focus within a boundless system of possibility. In this view, your awareness doesn't arise randomly in one branch. It localizes. It tunes in to a specific frequency of reality. Not unlike a radio station, selecting one signal from a spectrum of overlapping waves. You are not generating reality, but you are aligning with it. Think about dreams. In sleep, you move seamlessly through entire worlds with their own laws and logic. You wake and they vanish. But for a while, they felt just as real as waking life. If dreams can hold your attention so fully, how do you know you're not in another kind of dream now? A dream stabilized by consistency, memory, and physics. This isn't to say your life isn't real. It's to remind you that reality is participatory. You are not a passive passenger on the timeline. You are a navigator, not of events, but of awareness. You choose, second by second, how closely you want to align with clarity or chaos, courage or fear, presence or distraction. And here's where it gets subtle. In a multiverse, we often imagine the best version of ourselves. Stronger, smarter, more at peace. But what if the best version isn't the one who has it all figured out? What if it's the version who simply knows how to return to presence, to anchor in the moment even when the future is uncertain, to pause, to listen, to feel? That version isn't far away. That version isn't some alternate self in a perfect reality. That version is nearby. So close, in fact, that you can reach them, not with effort, but with stillness. Because the ultimate navigation tool isn't knowledge, it's awareness. When you are fully present, the timeline you occupy begins to reflect that presence. The outer world may still be complex, but your inner world gains coherence, and from that coherence, clarity emerges. You begin to act not from fear, but from alignment. You begin to speak not to defend, but to connect. You begin to live not from survival, but from resonance, a deep sense that you are moving in the direction of your own unfolding. And the multiverse responds, not by changing everything instantly, but by organizing subtly around your new signal. New people appear, new challenges emerge, not easier, but more meaningful. Synchronicities rise, patterns converge, not because you forced them, but because you became available to them. This is how reality listens. It listens not to your preferences, but to your presence. And your presence, your full engagement with this version of now, is the most powerful act in a branching universe. It's how you stabilize your path. It's how you deepen your timeline. It's how you become the version of yourself you once thought was out of reach. Because here's the truth, they were never out of reach. They were waiting, quietly, for you to stop chasing and start being. Even science, at its farthest edge, acknowledges this mystery. Quantum mechanics shows us that observation shapes outcomes. Neuroscience tells us that attention rewires the brain. Psychology reveals that intention shifts behavior. Philosophy reminds us that meaning is constructed, not found. So what happens when you bring those truths together? You begin to live multiversally, not by escaping into other lives, but by integrating the wisdom of them into this one. You begin to embody the version of yourself who already trusts, already learns, already forgives, already evolves. And through that embodiment, you close the gap. You collapse the illusion of separation between who you are and who you could be. You stop waiting for a shift and become the shift. This isn't about perfection. It's not about unlocking the right version of your life. It's about honoring the one you're in, not as random, not as flawed, but as meaningful. You are here, and here too exists the possibility of everything. All the versions, all the timelines, all the selves. But only one is asking these questions now. Only one is listening, breathing, and wondering. Only one is walking this exact path, in this exact way, through this exact world. That one is you. So here we are, at the end of a long journey through the multiverse. We've followed the science from quantum mechanics to cosmology, explored the philosophies of identity and freedom, imagined infinite versions of ourselves scattered across branching realities, and wondered what it all means, not just for the universe, but for the human experience. And now, we return to you, the you who is here in this version of reality, the one who pressed play, the one who has listened, reflected, drifted, perhaps deeply into thought, perhaps softly towards sleep. Maybe you're still awake, or maybe you're somewhere between. It's a fitting place to be because sleep itself is a kind of passage, a temporary letting go of this timeline, a quiet entry into others. In dreams, you move without resistance. You shift identities. You visit places that don't exist, talk to people who never were, feel emotions that rise and vanish without cause. Sleep shows us that awareness can stretch across boundaries, that we are more fluid than we think, and that maybe, just maybe, Even in waking life, we are not confined to one narrow thread of self. Maybe we are already in motion, already merging and branching, choosing and becoming in ways we can't fully measure. So if there's one message to carry with you now, let it be this. You are not a fixed character. You are a living process. You are not limited by your past, your habits, or even your current story. You are a traveler, moving through the terrain of possibility. In one branch you hesitate, in another you leap. In one you carry the weight. In another you set it down. All of it is you. All of it is valid. But this version, this one right here, is sacred because this is the version you are living, the version that breathes, the version that chooses, even if only to rest. And perhaps that's the most profound power you have in this whole strange, branching universe. The power to rest, to stop trying to figure it all out, to stop comparing timelines, to stop chasing perfection, and simply return to your breath, your body, this bed, this moment. That too is a form of multiversal magic, because by choosing presence, you stabilize the world you're in. You tell the universe, this is where I am. This is where I begin. And so, as the night wraps around you like a soft fabric, as your thoughts quiet and your body begins to melt into sleep, know this.
Somewhere, another version of you is doing the same.
And somewhere else, another version just remembered something beautiful, or let go of something painful, or laughed unexpectedly, or began again. You don't need to be all of them, just be you, here, now. Because in this infinite, expanding, mysterious cosmos, that is more than enough. Sleep well.